On this episode of Geekly, I ride a bike, visit the beach, and eat some Cheetos. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Geekly. I'm your presenter, Michael Moreau. I'm a photographer, cinematographer, author, artist, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I basically created this show because I want to talk about some things that I find personally interesting. So it's going to be me rambling a lot about things like technology, geeky things like conventions, science fiction conventions, books, films, comics, and just all kinds of things. I'm going to give you reviews, rants, raves, do-it-yourselves, how-tos, that type of thing. All kinds of stuff, basically. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do on this very first episode in the series is we're going to take a look at methods for storing and backing up your data. In front of me I have several common methods for backing up data. Everyone will recognize a standard USB stick. These are very handy little things. You can put them on your keychain or on a lanyard, bring them with you anywhere. They're fast, they're secure. Now let's talk about how long they last. That's a pretty popular question. How long do they last? How long do these little guys, how long is your data going to be safe on there? Well, manufacturers tend to give a lot of different answers, but some of them are claiming up to, I believe, 10 million read-write cycles, which basically means that if you use this little guy 100 times a day for 27 years, that's how long it would work. And they're saying that stored data is typically safe for somewhere around 10 years if it's just sitting in a drawer. Of course, that's going to vary dramatically, but you'd have to assume that your data is going to be safe on here for at least a few years, 3 to 5 years or so. But like anything, it can fail. It can fail, it does fail, and that's why it's so important to back up your data. That's one thing I cannot stress enough, is that backing up data is one of the most important things that you can do. Because if you think about it, most of us now don't have photo albums, printed photo albums. It used to be the old thing that, hey, the house is on fire, run inside and save that photo album. Well, now you need to run inside and save your hard drive, because that's where all your stuff is. That's where all your kids' pictures are going to be. That's where all the videos of them are going to be. And way too many times we see people lose stuff because they lose their phone, they lose a hard drive crashes, and they lose everything that they've been saving for years. Phones are particularly bad for that. Everybody keeps everything on their phone and either doesn't know how or doesn't have the desire to back it up to something more secure. So these are very handy little things for storing data and for carrying data around with you. But what we're going to talk about in a minute is how to properly secure your data for the long run. Let's go ahead and get on to the trusty old burnable DVD. Most computers that anybody will have now will have DVD drives that can burn these, and blank discs are not very expensive, so you may be tempted to back things up to these. These are great, as long as you understand that there are risks associated with them. The main risk is going to be that they have a shelf life. Manufacturers do not advertise this, but these things have a shelf life. If you look it up, most manufacturers will tell you that they have about a 2-year shelf life, which is incorrect. They have a 5 to 10 year shelf life if they're stored properly. If they're put into a case, a sleeve like this, or even better, a jewel case, one of those CD cases, and then put somewhere in the top of a closet, inside a shoebox or something like that, where it's cool, dry, and doesn't get a lot of repeat scratching. Then you're going to be okay. Obviously, these things do get fingerprints on them. Just clean them very gently with a proper cloth. So a good way to back up data, especially if it's data that you think that you may not need again, but that you just don't want to throw in the recycle bin and delete forever. That's the best thing to do with these. Stuff you may not need again, but you might use again. This one here says stock footage number 2. I may never use this footage again, but I didn't want to throw it away, and I didn't want to keep it on a hard drive taking up space. So I put it on here, and hopefully when or if I ever need it again, it'll still have my data on it. Now, as far as long-term storage of large amounts of data, that's what we're going to get on. And I don't think I know a single other person that does it the way I do, but I'm very particular about data loss because several years back, I want to say about 7 years or so back, I had a hard drive crash on me that had my wedding and honeymoon pictures on it. And fortunately we were able to salvage most of the wedding pictures because other friends and family members had them. But our honeymoon pictures, we only ended up with about the 20 or so best ones that we had posted online. And we had taken 500 and something images, so we lost all those. And that's something that's totally avoidable. So what you'll see here, this is a nice metal case. You can get these from Harbor Freight. I'm going to list the website down here. You can order those from Harbor Freight or visit one if you have one in your town. They typically run about $35 for one of these cases, but I've seen them on sale as low as $20 or $25. Harbor Freight has a lot of sales, so check them out, and you never know what you might find in that store either. They have some really interesting stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, and you'll see how I have my hard drives. This material is called pluck foam, and what it is it's little tiny rectangles of foam that you can basically pluck out what you need to make the shape that you need to keep your stuff secure. As you can see, it keeps it nice and secure. It has some foam on the top to keep everything in place. Let's see if I can get it back in there. And it also has some foam at the bottom to keep everything nice and safe from being banged around. It even comes with a key. I've never used the key with it, but it's still pretty handy to know that it does have a key if you wanted to use that. Now here's the deal. Not only do I keep my hard drives nice and secure, like you should, but these hard drives are all backups. This is one thing that a lot of people do not like to hear, but if you want to keep your data nice and safe and secure, you need to have backups. So if I go to the store and I buy a shiny new 2 terabyte hard drive, I don't just buy one, I buy 2. It's more expensive, but I keep my data secure. That's the important bit. So for every one of these hard drives I buy 2 of them. So each hard drive you see in here is a backup of another one. So anything that's on this hard drive is also on another hard drive of the exact same size, so that I have 2 copies of my data. Not too long ago, I had, I believe, it was this drive. It wasn't this exact drive, but it was the drive that this one replaced. It crashed, and I lost a lot of stuff on there. But luckily, I had a backup drive. So what I was able to do was I was able to pull the old drive that no longer functioned. I went and bought this nice new USB 3 drive here. I used the previous backup as my new hard drive inside the computer, and then I use this one as the new backup. So I have backups of everything. Another thing that I do is a lot of times I'll bring my hard drives with me, and if I know I'm going somewhere where they don't have a SATA dock to put these in, I'll bring a SATA dock with me, and say if I go to my mother's house, my father's house, another friend or relative that would like some of my photos or things like that, I bring them with me and I put them on their computer. And that way, if for some reason my main computer and these hard drives all get destroyed or lost, then I still have backup copies at a friend or relative's house. So, there's also cloud storage. There are things like Google Drive, Dropbox, many other things like that. share things, back them up online. That way you have multiple copies. The more copies you have, the better. And the same goes for the good old classic DVDs. By trade, I am a professional wedding cinematographer. I shoot wedding videos. And I will tell everyone that if you want to make sure that you do not ever lose your wedding video, the best thing that you can do is take your disc, go home, and burn extra copies of it and put those away somewhere. Or if you have the knowledge and ability, rip it into a file. Well, actually now I give everyone an MP4 file of their special day, and the great thing about that is it can be put all kinds of different places, and you can give it to friends, family, relatives, and all that. So the great thing about that is your stuff is backed up. This is one thing I will continue to fuss at all of you about. Back your stuff up. It is not safe on your phone. You will lose that phone eventually, or your kid will throw it in the toilet. It has happened. Trust me, my little kid took off with her mommy's phone one day when she was about 18 months old, and I have no idea why. I just saw her get a funny look in her on her face, and she took off with the phone over her head, and just ran in there and chucked it in the toilet. Luckily, it was an older phone at the time that didn't have photo or video capability, so all she lost was some contacts, but it can happen. Just remember that. So back up the stuff off your phone, back up the stuff off your camcorder, back up everything, because backups are the way to make sure that you keep these memories for future generations, because most of us don't have physical media, photographs, etc., to actually keep track of that stuff anymore. So that's my tip for today.
Here's the next segment. The next segment is coming on right now, yeah.
Today I'm in beautiful Biloxi, Mississippi for CoastCon. This year's host hotel is the Quality Inn. Staying in the host hotel for a convention has many benefits. Chief among them, late night room parties and generally socializing with the guests. It's also a lot of fun to see everyone getting in the costume first thing in the morning and heading out to the convention.
It's good, clean fun. People here just to have fun and not cause any problems.
My name is Johnny Segura. I am a artist and cartoonist out of Lake Charles, Louisiana. I have several self-published comic books, and I like cartoons.
Danny Allain, I'm a comic book artist. I draw Dead Reckoning, and our new series is Joy Kill Club.
Well, my name is Alan Gilbreth. I am the head of Dark Oak Press and Media. I write the Galen Vampire series, the Jack Lago Mystery series, and the Inspector Peel Mystery series. This is my fourth CoastCon. We absolutely adore coming down to this convention. It's relaxed, it's beautiful, and it's a great excuse to come down and eat a lot of really good seafood.
Hi there, my name is MB Weston. It is day 3 of CoastCon. I am totally exhausted but upright. I'm really excited to be here. Basically, I write books. Most of them have explosions. I write the Elysian Chronicles series. It's a fantasy series about guardian angel warfare and treason. I tell people you want to think Navy SEALs meets Roman soldier with wings. And I'm also getting into steampunk. I have a paranormal thriller coming out, as well as a book of paranormal short stories coming out. And I also have a radio talk show. It's called The Final Cut in Movies, which puts science fiction and fantasy movies center stage, because seriously, who wants to watch Muggle movies? I know I don't. So, and I'm here at CoastCon. I'm absolutely loving it. If you haven't come this year, you've got to come back next year.
Hey, I'm Kimberly Richardson, also known as the Goth Librarian. I'm with Dark Oak Press from Memphis, Tennessee. Go Elvis! I am a writer of dark fantasy, psychological thriller, things that make you creep out in the middle of the night and during the day. I'm the author of the books Tales from a Goth Librarian, Maybon Pomegranate, The Decemberist, and I'm also the editor for the Dreams of Steam anthologies. Now, why I like coming to cons, especially CoastCon, these guys rock. I mean, I feel like I'm with my own kind, you know? You get to relax, you get to make new friends, you get to see your old friends, and you just get to have a blast.
This is a segment like they're calling me eating random stuff. No, seriously, turn off the f***ing camera. As you may have all figured out by now, I have quite an affinity for cameras. In fact, I'm always collecting old lenses, things like that. In fact, I'm shooting this on a DSLR right now with a Sigma 30mm 1.4 lens that I'm very fond of. I've also got here, I believe this is an old Minolta lens. This is a 135mm 2.8. Has this really nifty little lens hood. It's all metal that slides out, so you don't have to attach a separate lens hood. It has this very smooth focusing ring. And of course, I've got an adapter on it to fit my Canon EOS cameras. Clearly marked numbers for aperture and focus distance. Very nice clear piece of glass. And I want to say I picked this up for $25 used at a pawn shop. It is not the sharpest lens that I have, and in fact it's probably one of the softest lenses that I have, but it still has an interesting look to it. It's not good for shooting in low light, even despite the 2.8, just because it's not super sharp. It's not great for indoors, but it is fairly decent if you're trying to shoot some manual focus video outside, and you don't need it to be exactly sharp. If you're going for a more artistic look, you can look this up. Again, it is it's an MC lens. It is it's a focal length of 135mm, and it's an f2.8. So you can probably look this little guy up on eBay and pick this up for not very much. I would definitely say under $50. So not a bad little lens to have in your kit, but not one of my favorites. But you know, it does get used on occasion. When I first bought my very first Canon SLR, I bought a Rebel. It wasn't the XTI, I believe it was a Rebel XT, if I'm not mistaken. And of course it came with the kit lens, which is the 18 to 55, 3.5 to 5.6. But I also wanted something with some reach on it, and I strongly debated getting the Canon, what is it, 75 to 300. I really wanted that one, but the price was a little higher, and I did some online reviews and found that this Tamron was a little cheaper, about 20-30% cheaper, and was actually ever so slightly sharper. So I ended up going with this lens. As you can see, it's a pretty hefty lens here. Let's go ahead and take the back off. It let's turn this off of autofocus. Once you put that on there, you can see that when this bad boy is on your camera, there is no mistaking the fact that you are zooming in on something. So you may get a few odd looks when people see you with it, just because they think you're up to something. They might suspect you're some sort of peeping Tom. But so it's a pretty good lens. I will say that it is definitely nowhere near L series sharp. It's a good lens for the money. I believe you can pick one up for about $175. It's pretty responsive, and as long as you're either on a monopod or tripod, something like that, do not try to shoot 300 millimeters freehand, because you just can't do it. But as long as you're locked down, it's a pretty good lens. It's a good, reliable lens. It's sturdily built for a plastic lens. It's pretty solid. So I'll give it that. And you can, of course, shoot video with it as well if you need a nice long zoom. But just keep in mind, I believe, let's see, what's the focal, the f-stop on this. If I remember right, let's see, yeah, so the f-stop on it is a 4 to 5.6. So if you're shooting outside, no problem. I've shot some gorgeous video with this before, as long as you're either outside or somewhere with some natural light getting in. But if you're trying to shoot indoors, you're going to be boosting that ISO up a lot. I've also got here a little Canon FD 50 1.8. When I first got my Canon EOS, I looked up to see if the old Canon lenses would fit, and boy was I disappointed when I realized that they wouldn't. They said, oh, you can fit anything on a Canon, except for the old Canon lenses. Well, that's no fun. I found this little guy at a pawn shop, and the aperture mechanism on it was broken. And I told the lady that I'd give her $5 for it, just so I could play around with it, and I figured I'd use it for some macro work or something like that. Well, what I ended up doing was actually a lot more interesting than that. Because the aperture mechanism was already messed up, I took the lens apart and ended up removing the entire aperture mechanism. This lens was a little longer. Now the problem with the Canon FD lenses is that they're too far away from the mirror and sensor of a modern EOS SLR. By doing this, I was able to get that little lens closer to my sensor. So now I can focus to infinity with it. What I had to do was I removed the aperture mechanism, and then I took an old body cap, and I very carefully with a Dremel tool cut out what I needed to fit this lens into the body cap. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's actually just on a body cap with a little black tape to hold it in place. Some electrical tape. But as it turns out, this is actually a very good lens. Shooting in lower light situations, first off, you have an f1.8. Now, of course, it's locked open to f1.8, so the only time I ever use this is in a low light situation, or if I'm in a brighter light situation, but I'm trying to get a really soft, dreamy image, which, being that this is an older lens, it is a decent bit softer. But probably the absolute best thing about this is this buttery smooth little focusing mechanism. If you've ever had the Canon, the modern Canon 50mm f1.8, the nifty 50, the cheap plastic one that comes for about $100, it's a very sharp lens, it's a very good lens, but it is incredibly plasticky, and it has a very, very, very tiny little focusing ring on the top, whereas this one has this large, buttery smooth focusing mechanism. So this one does get a good bit of use because I do shoot a lot in low light, and sometimes that dreamy look ends up looking really nice. I shoot a lot of black and white with this. So again, you can pick these up for very cheap, probably in the $20-something range, and mod them like I did, or you can use them as a macro lens on your current Canon cameras. Lastly, what we're looking at is not really a lens, but you can use it to take photos with. This is what's known as a pinhole camera lens. All it is a body cap for my camera that I drilled a very tiny hole into. The hole has to be very, very tiny. So I drill the hole and then put in a piece of tin foil glued to the back. And then for the hole itself, I used a sewing needle. But at first, the hole was too big even from the sewing needle to get a decent image out of it. So I had to redo it with a second layer of foil, and I ended up using just the very tip of the sewing needle. The hole has to be incredibly minutely tiny. I can't even see light through it with my eye, it's so tiny. And honestly, if I could get the hole smaller, it would probably shoot even sharper. And then once you do that, you put this on the camera in place of the lens, and just go outside and play with your manual settings until you get something. And I'm going to go ahead and show you some sample images from some of these lenses now. Some of you watching this show may have grown up in the 80s like I did. You probably had an Atari 2600, but you might not have played the game I'm about to speak about. The game I'm talking about today is E.T. the Extraterrestrial, widely panned as one of the worst games ever created. At the time, it was such a huge flop that Atari ended up burying over 1 million copies of the game in a New Mexico landfill. I'm reading an article here that it looks like April 26th, ground is going to be broken in the landfill, and they are going to be digging it up. And I guess we're going to see if there actually are 1 million copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial buried down in there somewhere. As for Pac-Man, looks like the console version of the game sold around 7 million copies. But Atari still had an extra 5 million gathering dust in a warehouse in El Paso, Texas. So even Pac-Man didn't sell quite as big as they were thinking. It says that on April 26, 1989, Atari did bury a bunch of stuff in a landfill in Alamogordo. But we're not sure exactly what it was. But last year, media company Fuel Entertainment received the exclusive rights from the city of Alamogordo to go digging up the landfill. Looks like they're partnered now with Microsoft's Xbox Entertainment Studios and Lightbox Entertainment. They're going to finally put some of those conspiracy theories to rest. In other gaming news, GOG.com, that's Good Old Games, has announced that it will be releasing up to 100 classic PC gaming titles with Linux support. That's support for Ubuntu and Linux Mint in the coming months. I'd like to thank you all for joining me for this very first episode in the series. Have a good night.